Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the second album from Biosphere, Patashnik. So from the comments on my microgravity review, it's been made quite clear to me that I greatly underestimated that album's popularity and how much it had an impact on the scene. Even though I still hold my opinion that the sounds explored there aren't nearly as fresh sounding to me now that lots of other people have come along and done really similar stuff, but I'm told by the people who actually were there to see it come out in 1991 that it did stand out from the crowd way more at the time it was released. 1991, there was nothing like it. It basically was the first to that sound, and people did really notice. I'm not 100% sure if this second album made a similarly big splash, though. I mean, I could be wrong about it, of course. In 1994, I had yet to be born for another year, and obviously was not there to see it. But, Patashnik is basically just more of the same kind of stuff as Microgravity. I mean, quality-wise, it's about equal, so I can see some people in 1994 that missed Microgravity show up to this one first and have more nostalgia for it, so they hold it up in higher regard. I personally did hear the title track on this thing before hearing any other Biosphere material, so I did get a little bit of that, but for the most part I just regard this album as Microgravity Part 2, and as a result I might regard it as slightly a weaker project. Microgravity didn't really have any major weak points. It got in and got out quickly, had just 9 tracks that were all solid in their own right but all fit together in the same vibe. Patashnik has 12 tracks. A bit more unwieldy and doesn't do as good a job of grasping my attention. But like I said earlier, I don't think it's that far behind in terms of quality. This is still a pretty solid project all around. I just have a hard time praising it as much as other projects in his catalog when there are these obvious comparisons that can be made and not in Patashnik's favor. So okay, let's talk about individual tracks. I will say the intro Phantasm does a good job of hooking you in. All its somewhat harsh 90s synth patterns with repetitive vocal sample playing on top. We had a dream last night. We had the same dream! Like with everything on Microgravity, it does sound seriously dated, but it does carry its own charm in that way. You also got ambient cuts like Star Toucher that have no beat and just focus on shifting pads and a really minimalistic feeling of open space. But after this, the beats come in a bit harder, or at least hard by Biosphere standards. There's a bunch of tracks in a row that try to have a smidge more energy, like the repetitive and dissonant patterns of Decryption, which notes it's so frightening to lose yourself. The dark and much more foot-tapping Novelty Waves, which, as I mentioned before, was used in Dean's commercials and was a minor hit as a result. Though if you hadn't told me it was used in a commercial, I would not have been able to guess. It really doesn't sound like your typical choice for commercial soundtracking. And yeah, this is one of the few tracks I can see going over well in a club environment, even if I'm told that this isn't really the kind of stuff you'd actually hear in clubs at the time. Most people save it for after hours, but yeah, this is one of the bigger highlights for me too. Anyways, you got the title track, which I did mention was the first track I ever heard from Biosphere. That said, in spite of this, I only have slightly more of a connection to this track than the others. The nostalgia factor is there, but not as strong as it could be, since I never listened to it all that religiously. But I have always liked the blend of the Russian voice samples alongside the spacey pads and quick-moving hi-hat progressions. It was certainly never going to be a least favorite for me. You got Myrrh, another ambient cut like Star Toucher that has an even more subtle approach than that one somehow. Creates a more pervading sense of melancholy. That's another one of the strongest moments on here. Then The Shield is the longest track on here at almost 9 minutes, mainly justifying that length by being split up into 2 distinctive parts. You got the beginning where it's purely minimalistic and menacing ambient pads with a couple of satellite beeps. Though 3 minutes in or so, it builds up more of these dissonant patterns and a strange breakbeat gets layered on top for a bit more of a foot-tapping edge. Other synth patterns and progressions are introduced throughout to prevent it from getting too repetitive or wearing out its welcome, easily creating one of the most interesting and investing cuts on this thing. Then there's SETI Project, easily the most energetic moment on the album, and quite possibly the most energetic moment of Biosphere's entire career. Which, isn't saying much, but still, it's mainly characterized by its really up-tempo and fast-moving beats that almost border on drum and bass, and less than serious voice sample asking, "Can you imagine an extraterrestrial disc jockey?" The synth patterns behind it still carry that dark atmosphere to fit the rest of the album, but otherwise it sticks out like a sore thumb. At least in a good way, one that adds more variety to this thing. Then you got a brief ambient interlude in Mist Goth that features some field recordings, and after this, honestly, the album kinda slides back off for me. Botanical Dimensions is the single track on here that wasn't actually written by Jansen himself, but rather Karsten Brustad, or however you say her name. But if you hadn't told me that, I would not have been able to guess, because it doesn't actually stick out in any way. It's like a weaker version of some of those beat-focused cuts on Microgravity, like Baby Satellite or Chromosphere. It's pretty forgettable if you ask me, as is the following track, Caboose. Keeps up the atmosphere of the previous tracks, but doesn't do much to set itself apart from the crowd. At least it has a bit more progression than other moments on here, and evolves more. But it still never really stuck out to me as a standout. And finally, we close with Entrance, which is at least a bit more distinctive with its acoustic guitar strumming layered over the usual blend of synth progressions and pads. Also a neat nod to Klaus Schulze with that title, I believe. And now we gotta get into bonus tracks. See, this album got a re-release in 2016 that happens to include an entire second disc of bonus material, which itself was released as a standalone compilation called Patashnik 2, so I'll discuss that briefly. There's 4 different alternate demo versions of tracks from the main album that are just different enough to justify listening to, and several B-sides that presumably did not make the cut for the main project, but otherwise sound like they fit perfectly alongside them. Though I will admit this particular collection was more enjoyable than the bonus tracks for Microgravity. While they still don't offer much to discuss, they are all at least decently fleshed out, and feel like they're kind of forming an album in their own right. A track like The Third Planet is pretty obviously a B-side, but it's at least up to par with the stuff on the main album. You can also notice those right off the bat looking at the track listing that there's a 10-minute track there called A Circular Path. That sounds like it'd be a fun ride, and it is in fact one of the strongest moments on here, if pretty straightforward and not containing a lot in the way of surprises. There's other good moments on here like Juno, it was a good little interlude that left an impact too. I also liked Modulation of Static. Though there were also tracks like The Light One, which were a bit less distinctive sounding. I mean, that one may as well have come from some random artificial intelligence artist like B12 or something. But I will admit, I was pleasantly surprised by Patashnik 2 across the board, in spite of its being a bonus disc. It was a fun listen. It's worth a shot. So okay, overall, on Patashnik, I will have to first give this album credit. It's not like there's absolutely nothing you can get here that you couldn't already get out of Microgravity. The main thing that Patashnik has going for it over his debut is just the fact that it feels like a lot more of a holistic experience. This album flows much better and comes together as a whole much more than Microgravity as well, even though Microgravity is better standout tracks, I think. Not to mention there's a bit of a lonelier vibe coming off of this as well, right down to the title, which Jansen has been cited in saying as Russian slang for a cosmonaut who didn't get to return from a mission because their tether got cut, and now they're just floating out into nothingness forever. Not to mention, unlike Microgravity, which wore out on me with repeat listens, Patashnik did in fact get a little bit better with each listen I gave it. Just a little. And it might have also helped that I made this video before I actually got sick of it. I suppose at the end of the day, Patashnik and Microgravity are approximately equal enjoyability-wise. Might even get a little more out of this one, at least at this current moment. But not by so much that it makes up for my criticism that there isn't that much you can get out of this album that you couldn't already get out of his debut. It's a pretty blatant rehash, and I can't just overlook that, especially when he would go on to deliver more creative material afterwards. So, yeah, I'll give this album a quarter point lower than Microgravity with my rating. I'm overall feeling a 7.3 out of 10. But of course, it's just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.